Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Rian Keating. Today we're privileged to be in the company of one of America's finest singers, a woman who has been delighting generations of music lovers with her renditions of My Ideal, all the way up to her current recording of Come a Little Closer. It's a privilege to be joined by Margaret Whiting. She'll be joining us right after this message. Margaret, this is a pleasure. You've certainly been in a generation of show business. Stop, we have to start this again. I'm sorry. Well, it's always the first question. I want to talk about things. Margaret, welcome. This is a pleasure.
Thank you.
There have been many generations of music lovers in your family.
Well, we can go way back to my father, Richard Whiting, who started writing songs in 1915, and he passed away in 1938. His last song was Hooray for Hollywood. There was my aunt, Margaret Young, who was a big singer in vaudeville in the 20s. Sophie Tucker was my godmother, and my mother was an agent and handled both my aunt and, for a while, Sophie Tucker. And then there was my sister Barbara and myself. We did the television show. Barbara did a lot of pictures. I was singing. And now I'm followed by my daughter, Debbie, who's been singing around New York at different night spots, Rachel's and Horn of Plenty and Snafu, and is going to do quite well. So it's just, if you're a Whiting or anything to do with a Whiting, you've been singing or writing music a long time. And it's wonderful because the music business is changing now. We all went into contemporary music, and now the contemporary music is joining the older music, the more popular music, and the new songs are coming out just great.
Do you think that being a Whiting, certainly you had a certain image to live up to because of your father being a songwriter?
Well, I had an image to live up to, but it was very hard being his daughter, because although he is not as renowned as a Hank Fonda, for example, or someone, a movie star, my father was one of the top songwriters in the world and in the country, and there was magic connected to him and all of his friends, Jerome Kern, George Gershwin, Cole Porter, Harry Warren, Johnny Mercer. And I was raised almost like a princess out in Hollywood. I mean, I was the daughter of a great songwriter and soon to be a singer, and all these friends that were around all the time at these parties, it was very special, and I had to live up to that.
Do you think that with this generation, Debbie has the same problem, or is she able to circumvent it?
Well, it's harder today, not because of the problem of her being Margaret Whiting's daughter, but it's harder because there aren't that many places to play. There are very few nightclubs. The nightclub business is fading out for a while. Theater is very tough. It's very tough to get a show on. It's so costly. There's not so much summer stock or winter stock. There's a lot of television and pictures, but even they have been having problems. So you've either got to be in New York or Los Angeles, and you've got to be expected to put in a lot of time before you make it. There's not even a radio show. See, when I started, I was on NBC in Hollywood. When Patti Page started, she was in Tulsa on a radio show. Dinah Shore started at WNEW in New York. Helen O'Connell started in Ohio. Rosemary Clooney started in Ohio. Everybody had one radio show that had a band, and they had several programs a day, and that's how they all started. But we don't even have that today, so it's tough.
One of the things that was legendary in Hollywood was Saturday Night at the Whitings.
Oh, yes, Saturday Night at the Whitings. Well, it was funny. When my father was alive, he loved parties, so my mother used to throw these magnificent parties in the 30s with Ernest Lubitsch and Leo McCarey and David Butler and Buddy DeSilva, the great directors. DeSilva was also a producer and also a great songwriter. Then we had Marie Chevalier and Shirley Temple and Jeanette MacDonald and Buddy Rogers, and then on to the greats of the 30s, the Bob Hopes and people and Ethel Merman. And then, after he passed away and I started singing, we continued with the parties, and every Saturday night we'd have Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, Mel Torme, Martha Raye, June Allison, Nancy Walker, Mercer, and Arlen, and Ralph Blaine, and Hugh Martin, and, all the songwriters that were around would come in and play their new songs for us and come to the parties. We'd have as many as 110 people on a Saturday night.
It's been said when you first were introduced to Johnny Mercer, you crept downstairs during one of these parties and sang 2 songs. And
I did.
He said, "Do me a favor and grow up."
And I did, but while I was growing up, he took me aside and he taught me, if this sounds like a piece of material, it is part of what I say about him in the show that I'm producing, I Remember Johnny, The Magic of Mercer, and I also do it in my own act. So I don't want it to come out like it's pat, but he did teach me the joy of singing and how to phrase a lyric and how to pick a hit song. And he signed me to my first record company, Capitol, because he was the boss. And he became my very best friend. He kind of became the man in our house after Daddy died. And my father was so crazy about Johnny. He said, this is one of the greatest talents that I've ever seen in my life. This man can't help but be one of the brilliant songwriters. And even though my father's buddies were Jerome Kern and Harry Warren and George Gershwin and Cole Porter, they all felt the same way about Johnny. They said, this is a young genius. And truly he was. And I'll go on a limb and say, I have sung all the great songwriters and a lot of new songwriters, but I don't think anyone's song ever touched everyone's heart as much as Johnny's. There's something special about him. So how lucky I was to be in his hands. And you know, when we started at Capitol, I was the first artist signed, but I didn't make the first record. But he started with Lady Day, Billie Holiday, and he called her Lady Day. For whatever reason, she made a record with Paul Whiteman called I'm Traveling Light. And then he did Mr. Polka himself, and Phil Silvers was on the record. Then he did Ella Mae Moore singing with Freddie Slack's band, and she did Cow Cow Boogie. They had the most tremendous record. I mean, million sellers, all four of them, the first records that came out. And then we developed and we got I say we because I was part of the family. We got Stan Kenton and Nat Cole and Frank Sinatra. And I mean, we had Joe Stafford and K-Star and Peggy Lee. And I mean, we really were a tight-knit family. And we used to hang out together. And we used to go down to the offices together. And that's something I miss today. You just don't have a family feeling about a picture you make, a play you do. You get close, and when it's over, you part. But this Capitol Records family was a family I was in 16 years, and there's never been anything like it for me.
It was started by Mercer and Buddy DeSilva.
Buddy DeSilva and a man called Glenn Wallach, who owned Music City. And he knew the power of how to sell records. And also, since the record company started during the war, there was no shellac. And that's what you needed in those days to press records. So he had people come into his record shops. He had two, one at Music City, Hollywood and Vine, and another one in the Valley. He was very smart. He said, come in and I'll give you all the new records you want for free if you bring me your old records. So he melted down the shellac. So we started with $25,000 and 20,000 pounds of shellac. That's how it started.
How much, because they were very politically aware and very patriotic, and that's why they named it Capitol Records?
No, it was another name that escapes me, and they realized that that company, there was another company with that name. So somebody used to say it was a capital idea, meaning a terrific idea. So they were, I mean, patriotic, but not to a point, you know, that it was overwhelming. They just said, why not Capitol? And somebody said it's a capital idea, and that was that.
How much influence do you think the war had on the success of the big band era, and especially the careers of, well, Joe Stafford and K-Star?
Well, anybody who was singing on the label. The war had a great deal to do with it because, to me, the world has never been as united. Today it isn't, certainly, as it was then. The war had all to do with it. We came out in 1942, the record company, and men and women were away all over the world fighting for us. But they had all kinds of ways of sending the records over. So when they heard a new company and new people, they were terribly impressed. And for example, when I did Moonlight in Vermont, they said, who was that girl? She reminds us of home. She's singing a song about someplace home. So when they came back, they said, who is that girl? But it had a great deal to do with it because there was such a united front, and everybody was fighting for a common cause. And so when something new came along, I mean, we didn't have all the movies and everything because they were making movies and they were making records and they were doing everything, but it was united front on that. And when something new came along, everybody bought it. Everybody developed it. And it was the time when they sang songs like I'll Walk Alone, I Don't Want to Walk Without You, Baby, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree. There were phrases G.I. Joe, you know, G.I. Jive, G.I. this, phrases that were common and in the letters that we wrote back and forth to the men and the women. And it was all very much a part of it. And there was a togetherness then that we don't have now. And that really helped the company and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Your father died when you were 11. How did you deal with that, being so young?
Well, I'm a survivor, so you just deal with it. I mean, I was very close to my father. I was I had a sister, but she was just a kid, you know, just a baby. And I used to wait for my father to come home from the studio, and he would, after dinner, he would play me all the new songs he'd written or things that he'd gotten copies of Richard Rodgers' new song or something like that. So it really meant a great deal to me, and he started my musical background. I mean, he taught me Little Girl Blue and Funny Valentine and all these, and he played Kern songs and Harry Warren songs, and they would come over and I would be able to sit around with them and listen to the songs for the first time. So it hurt me a great deal, and I was very close to him, and musically I was so close to him, and you never get over that. Mother was a terrific lady with a great sense of humor and planned all the parties for my father and kept Barbara and I away from him and let him go to the studio and write and everything, but they were completely different. I mean, Mother was very outgoing, great sense of humor. My father had a great sense of humor, but he was very gentle and very quiet. And I think I'm a combination of both. But it, I don't know, I didn't realize what a wonderful background I had and how lucky I was to have my father to teach me music and to have his friends around. Jerome Kern was Uncle Jerry to me till much later. I mean, I knew, sure, he went to that piano. And
well, one thing your father said about Jerome Kern was that he was the genius of us all.
They all did. They all did. I went over to his house one day to hear some songs. He asked me to come over for tea and to hear some songs. And everything was getting along just great. I love the tea, Uncle Jerry. Let's go hear the songs, you know. Sure, I knew he wrote Old Man River. I mean, but he was Uncle Jerry. I mean, everybody that I knew wrote songs. And he started to play Dearly Beloved. And I suddenly, sitting at his side in his home, at his piano, boom, 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 boom. This man was the greatest. George Gershwin, there's no one like Jerome Kern. And it's going through my head, and I just panicked. He said, "What's wrong, Maggie?" I said, "Uncle Jerry, I don't know. What do you say when you want to come back for tea?" He says, "What do you think of the song?" I said, "How can you say anything about a Jerome Kern song?" He said, "I'm Uncle Jerry." I said, "How can I say anything about Uncle Jerry Jerome Kern songs?" He said, "Well, do you like it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, thank God." It was so funny because he suddenly knew, but he never, around our house or whenever I was with him, I mean, people just treated him with such respect and reverence, but he was just Uncle Jerry. So I never thought of any of these people except, oh yes, they wrote music, and oh yes, I could sing it, but they were just my friends and my father's friends that watched me grow up. Once in a while I would say, "You're not hitting the right note," or try singing it this way, but they were just friends that, oh, by the way, they wrote the songs, or they did things.
Well, we must pause for a commercial message, and we'll be back in a moment.
Just once, called Our Half Hour, and Skitch Henderson was the pianist. And Skitch Henderson started playing for my Aunt Margaret. After my father died, my Aunt Margaret came out to California, and she wanted to pursue her career, which she was singing at Bill's Gay 90s in New York. The man who sang that suggested Skitch Henderson. So Skitch, as a young man, met me, and I started singing with Skitch, and he asked me to come on the show with Johnny. And there was Bobby Sherwood, who was a great guitar player and trumpet player. They had an all-star band, and it was a local show in the morning. And I went on, and Johnny was nervous. And I was so busy helping him. And then I almost felt like fainting. But I sang a couple of my father's songs, and NBC called me the next day. Called my mother and asked if I couldn't go on every week. But they wanted me on with Gordon Jenkins. Gordon Jenkins. That would have a half hour of music or something. Imagine starting out with Gordon Jenkins arrangements. I was going to school, of course, at the time, but that was really the beginning. And then a couple of years later, Johnny started Capitol Records. He wanted but he wanted other people to come along. And so, and he wanted songs done the way the songwriters wrote them. So he went to Buddy DeSilva, who was his boss at Paramount. His buddy was the head of Paramount. And he Wallace about my first record, and on the back do a song that Buddy DeSilva wrote. He said, you should do one of Buddy's and one of your father's. See, Buddy DeSilva was a great friend of my father's for many years, was a producer at Fox, hired my father, wanted to write with him, hired him for a couple of Broadway shows. So we're talking about Buddy's now. So I did a thing called Without Love and My Ideal. But strangely enough, there's a picture called Star Spangled Rhythm in 1943. And it was all the Paramount stars were in. People like Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake and Zarina, and Johnny Johnson did a song called Black Magic. Johnny Johnson was signed to our label. And Johnny Mercer did not like the way the record turned out. So he said, got a band that's now a star, Freddie Slack, Ella Mae Moore cannot sing this kind of song. You do it. So my first record that came out actually was Black Magic. And that morning, I really almost fainted. I knew it was going to be on. They played it the first time. I said, do I sound like that? Is that the way they sound? I'm going to give up. Oh, God. You know, and it was a big hit. And then they brought out My Ideal with Billy Butterfield and Without Love. And then the following year, they brought out Moonlight in Vermont. And then that kind of did it. But my
And you were only success at that level, or did it not faze you because all of your acquaintances at that time had been professionals and successful?
Well, it didn't. Once, if you're raised in a theatrical family, it doesn't faze you. You're used to it. You're used to having all the stars around you, and you're used to, you know. As I started as my father's daughter, I had all the stars and songwriters and people around the house, and then I guess it was just an evolving into doing it myself, and they kind of expected it. It was hard. It was difficult because, like Buddy DeSilva said, she doesn't need it. She's got enough money because of her father, and a lot of people didn't. Because once you have a hit record, New York, it didn't work out that way. I had three successful radio shows. Then they brought me back to do Eddie Cantor and move on. But it was always the call, the lure of New York to get me back because I love the theater so much. I prefer that to anything.
Well, your home in Bel Air had been on fire in 1963, a couple of years before you came here. How did that change your perception of material goods?
That was the thing that made me realize that the roots are within me and not my apartment or not my house or not my car or anything else. I mean, the house didn't burn. We were very lucky. But the first thing we did, the first thing I took out was my father, 2 records my father had given me, Puccini's Madame Butterfly. And because he wanted me to know about classical music too. And then we took out clothes and arrangements, and we threw everything we could, like silverware and everything, in the swimming pool because the fire can't burn it. And we came back the next day, and we were not burned out, but many people were. But that made me realize what it's earthquakes, people all around here, floods, New Jersey and everything. So to me, the important thing is to know who and what you are, and know that the house, everything is not the roots. I am the roots. So I just think it went the next year. And I've been here ever since, and people say, oh, how can you live in New York? I said, very simply. I love it. It's the hub. It's the most exciting place. Strangely enough, I find out now, I was just in Bucks County for the Greenbrier in West Virginia to work for a night special show. I appreciate the beauty of those places, the outdoors, the ocean, the lakes, the flowers, more now living in the big city because I don't get it every day. See, in California, I had this big home and I had flowers and I loved it. And I do miss growing flowers and everything like that, but I find that I appreciate things much more because I'm in the big city, and when I get away, it's different.
What were your first impressions of New York when you would come here at 21 from Hollywood?
Not much more than they are now. I mean, just, oh God, isn't this wonderful? I mean, the museums and the plays and the movies and the streets and the stores and the excitement. There's a vitality here that no other place has. Minneapolis is a city that's getting some of our vitality. San Francisco is another kind of vitality. Los Angeles just doesn't have it.
But do you think that's cohesive to a creative
Absolutely,
outlet?
Absolutely. I find it's much easier to be creative here than it is in Hollywood. And I speak of that only. I mean, there are creative people all over the world, but I speak of that as the 2 meccas of the entertainment industry, of which we are, I imagine, we're speaking of. I know writers that prefer to live. Stephen King lives in Maine, and Ludlum lives in Connecticut, and you can tell the kind of books I read with Stephen King and Robert Ludlum, spy stories and horror stories. But I think if you have to write, that's a discipline that's hard in New York. I know that I'm working on a book now with Will Holt, who wrote the play I was in, Taking My Turn, and another play I was in over here. And very fine songwriter and a terrifically talented man. And we either work at his house or here, and we find with the phone ringing and everything, it's very difficult. So sometimes we go to the park and sit and just talk on the tape recorder, because other people.
Well, Margaret, our time is up. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to next week.
All right.
This is Spotlight with Rian Keating, and today we've been chatting with Margaret Whiting. Spotlight airs Tuesday evenings at 8:30 on Channel D, and again Saturday mornings at 9:30 on Channel J and 11:30 on Channel C, and again Sunday nights at 1 a.m. on Channel J. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can write to myself in care of Perot Productions, 640 10th Avenue, New York, 10036. Be sure to join us next week when we'll be continuing our discussion with Margaret Whiting. Until then, have a good week.